Good evening. I'm Dr. Grace Telesco, and welcome to the Criminal Justice Forum. We're live streaming from the NSU Fischler College of Education and School of Criminal Justice YouTube channel. Each of our programs examine exciting topics in the field of criminal justice, and all of our guests bring fascinating and thought-provoking topics to life, as each of our educational programs bridge the gap between theory and practice. Welcome to the Criminal Justice Forum. So welcome everyone. Again, Dr. Grace Telesco, and I am so excited tonight because I'm joined by Dr. Teresa Lilly White, who I never knew before. And we thank Sharon Plotkin, Dr. Sharon Plotkin, now Dr. Sharon Plotkin, for introducing us. So we have the beginning here of a beautiful relationship, a beautiful collaboration. And I know that many of you are so fascinated by forensics. And if you're fascinated by forensics, I think tonight you're going to be even more fascinated. We titled it something cute, I've got a bone to pick with you. But let me introduce Dr. Teresa Lilly White to you. She is a forensic anthropologist. She received her PhD in anthropology in 2019 from the University of Montana. And now her and her husband, Samuel, are the owners of Bone and Stone Anthro-Sciences, where they provide anthropological and archaeological consulting services and educational workshops. She is an expert as a medical investigator and DMORT region team member with the Department of Health and Human Services and National Disaster Medical Systems. I'm going to talk a little bit about that maybe later on, DMORT, because that's something that Dr. White and I have in common, and we'll explain why later. She teaches so many courses. This is the tip of the iceberg, but let me just tell you, she teaches courses on cultural and forensic anthropology, human osteology, death notification interactions. In fact, her right before the show, we were chatting a little bit, and she said that her dissertation is in death notifications, which again, I find very fascinating. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. Forensic entomology theory, methods including collection techniques, postmortem interval estimations, and the list goes on and on. Gunshot trauma, blunt force after a car fire. I mean, this woman is an amazing walking forensic anthropology metaphor. Unbelievable. So I'm not going to take up any more of your time with listening to me until later on, but we'll come back. Again, we are live streaming from the Fischler College of Education School of Criminal Justice YouTube channel. And we are going to it looks like everybody's raising their hand already. They want to meet you. And Joyce is raising her hand. Everybody's raising their hand. So we're all excited. We're going to put our hands down for now. And we will definitely, I promise you and assure you that we're going to have time to field as many of the questions as possible. First, we'll go to the webinar questions, and then we'll go to the YouTube participant chat, and we'll field your questions there. But I'm not going to take up any more time because we really want to hear from you. Dr. White, please feel free now to share your screen, and I'm going to stop my video and highlight you. So you're spotlighted for everyone, and whenever you are ready, you can share your screen, and we can get right to it.
I should be sharing.
You are. It looks great. And so do you.
Oh, thank you. Well, I want to thank, number one, Dr. Grace Telesco for asking me to do this. I'm flattered. Sharon, Dr. Plotkin, and I get into a lot of trouble together and have a lot of fun together. So I wasn't surprised when she sort of gave Dr. T my name. And but I also want to thank you guys for showing up. I know most or many of you are in Florida, and so 7 o'clock on an evening that you're coming to listen. I'm very flattered. Thank you so much. And so I also want to thank Alpha Phi Sigma I believe that you guys shared some of this information, so thank you, and thank you guys for coming. I wanted to let you know that as we move along, if you have questions or whatever, I'm okay with answering them as they go. I've got quite a few slides, so I talk fast, and so hopefully if I don't answer your question along the way, we can answer it, I don't know, somewhere along the way. So I'm going to throw a lot of information at you, and hopefully I cover everything that you're thinking of in this short amount of time that we have together. A little disclaimer, there are going to be some pictures of human remains that are displayed. So if you don't want to watch that, go ahead and turn your screen off, and you can just listen, I guess. So if that works for you guys. So anyway.
And I think that's great, Dr. White. I'm so glad that you said that. This is Dr. Telesco, and so since we are live streaming on YouTube, I want to make sure that everyone on YouTube also understands that there might be some graphic photos shown of human remains, and if that triggers you in any way, shape, or form, or disturbs you in any way, shape, or form, please feel free to get up and walk away, and then come back later.
And one of the things I wanted to say too is I do a lot of, I read off the screen, and that is because that a lot of people don't join and watch it, they join and listen. So I know that annoys some people when you read off the screen, but I'm doing it for the people that are just listening. So anyway, let's move on. Okay, so this is basically my bio, which Dr. T already read, but this is just a quick picture of my husband and my Boston Terrier, and my Boston Terrier is very mad at me right now. But anyway, so this was a quick little plug. So the objectives of this presentation is, after attending this, you'll be more a better understanding of what forensic anthropologists do and how they might assist law enforcement, crime scene investigators, medical legal death investigators, medical examiners, and others with human remains located at a death scene. Okay, so anthropology is the scientific study of humanity, and it's concerned with human behavior, human biology, cultures, and societies in both present and past. Now, there's a lot of definitions for anthropology, but I like this one because it sort of gets to all of it, and it's a big deal. There are 4 subdisciplines to anthropology. One is physical / biological anthropology. Another one is archaeology, which my husband is a PhD in archaeology. Another one is cultural anthropology, which my PhD took in cultural anthropology as well. And then the last one is linguistics. And forensic anthropology is it's a special subfield of the first one, which is physical biological anthropology. So what is physical anthropology? Well, there's many definitions with this too, but I picked this one. The application of anthropological method and theory to matters of legal concern, particularly those that relate to the study of the human skeleton. So what do forensic anthropologists do? Well, there's several different types of things that we can do in different jobs and different placements. Medical legal death investigator or coroners. We can work in law enforcement agencies. We teach or work in academia. Some of us are researchers, writers, publishers. A lot of folks do human rights work. We work in medical legal medical examiners' offices or crime labs. We do community work or emergency services. This next one is what Dr. T was talking about, HHS DMORT in DMS services. Well, that is disaster mortuary services, Red Cross, things like that. We do private consulting, which we do pretty often. We provide expert witnesses, and we act as cultural liaisons, and also we do cultural management. So our role in a death investigation is to, and I wrote this down, attempt to determine the who, what, when, and where of these things. Now, you'll notice that something's sort of missing over, from that list, and that is why. Well, most of the time we don't know why people do what they do to other people, what they do to themselves. So that's one of the things that we don't often get the answer to. But these other things we attempt to look and to determine the answers to. So what types of calls do forensic anthropologists receive from law enforcement or death investigators? Well, I've listed several of these. We get other types of calls too, but these are the basic calls that we get. We get a bone is discovered, and what do I do? We get, hey, I think I have a suspected burial here, or a clandestine burial. Or they have decomposed remains and they need help with that, or they need sort of an ID assist. Maybe we have burned or cremated remains. We call them cremains. Maybe they need body removal, recovery, death notification, or family assistance, or case review, both current cases and cold cases. So let's just go over each of those real quickly. So the first one is bones discovered. And so I do a lot of this with law enforcement because they're not trained osteologically, which means with bones. So I get a lot of phone calls and I go to a lot of different scenes when bones are recovered. And so, you know, the first thing we have to do is sort of decide if they're bones or not. So that's one of the big things that I do. We go to suspected burials, or what other people call clandestine burials. And so sometimes we'll go, and if we do believe that it's indeed a burial, then we do the full exhumation. So a lot of our time is spent with the exhumation, recovery, things like that. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. Maybe we have decomposed remains, or we do an ID assist. Now, my master's research was on decomposition, and a good portion of it, half of it was on forensic entomology. So I did a longitudinal study that was a year long. And so I just went and sort of took samples and took notes of the, decomposition processes. So that's what law enforcement looks for a lot of times. They want to know, this person is, bloated, or they're skeletonized, or how long have they been here? So those are the questions that we kind of help them get to, or we help them get the answers to those questions. And so we look at certain areas when, where was this body found? What are the temperatures? Things like that. So that's how we assist with sort of decomposed remains. Then we have like the burned and cremated remains. So we can help with that. We help with body removal or recovery. And Dr. T had mentioned that we have in common DMORT and disaster mortuary services. Now, what we do is a lot of times just the body recovery for natural or man-made disasters. And so just in the last, I think between 2020 and now, I've been on 4 deployments, and all of those were COVID related. So anyway, we did quite a bit of that for COVID. I do the, sort of the death notification help. And I also work with a company that does family assistance in times of disaster. So we do that. We also do cold case or current case reviews. So we'll look at remains and sort of establish if there's, sort of what types of trauma, things like that are going on with the remains. And so that's another thing that we do. So what happens when law enforcement or death investigators call? We need to determine how we can help. So that was a little bit about the 4. So is the located item that they call me about when we talked about they found a bone, is it bone or is it stone? Well, a lot of times bone can look like stone, bone can look like sticks, stones. It can look like drywall. It can look like, pottery. So you want to determine whether or not it is bone or if it's stone. And so there's certain ways to figure this out. Now in this picture, there are bones and there are stones and there are sticks. And so with an untrained eye, it would be really hard to, sort of pick out the bone from the stone, from the sticks. Ribs look a lot like twigs. And so all of those are in this particular picture. So that's sort of our trained eye that helps look for that. Next, if it is bone, we need to determine if it's human or non-human. And the way that I explain this, I have both a webinar that I do for TriTech, and I also do a sort of a live class. And what we do is we sort of teach how to differentiate between human and non-human. And what I like to tell the students or the attendees of this class is that if you know human osteology, if you learn human osteology, you're going to be able to tell the difference between human and non-human. And for some of the, the skulls, it's pretty easy to tell the difference. But anything else is a little bit more difficult. So, but we always suggest to learn the human osteology, and then, you're quite a ways there. Like these two pictures, on the one side is a human skull and then a deer skull. And then on the other one, it's a deer pelvis, with the sacrum. And then there's a human pelvis with the sacrum. So, they're similar, but there's different morphological differences. And morphological means shape differences. So those sort of distinguish the difference. But we all have really similar bones, same bones. So that's something that we do. That's one of the things that we do. So if the remains are not human, and we show up and we say, nope, not human, then we're done. Go out and go have some fun and whatever. Now, what do we do if we discover the remains are human? Well, let's take a look at a couple examples here. If skeletal remains are human, we need to determine if they're contemporary or non-contemporary. And so by contemporary or non-contemporary, what does that mean, or why does that matter? Well, contemporary remains, which we consider modern remains, are remains that are less than 50 years old. Non-contemporary remains are sort of the historic, which are 50 years to like 500 years. And then you have the ancient or prehistoric remains, which are greater than 500 years old. Well, we're interested in contemporary remains because those that are older than 50 years old usually fall out of the purview of forensic investigations. And you wonder, well, why is that? Well, unfortunately, after about 50 years, a lot of your witnesses have passed on. The case, you talk about a cold case, that's a really cold case. So, when you get beyond those years, you don't have, those people that can testify if you need somebody to testify. So that's why it's important to know whether it's contemporary or non-contemporary. So let's take a look at this picture. This sort of gives you a hint of sort of contemporary, non-contemporary. These were recovered remains. And up on the picture here, there's a pair of glasses. Now, it used to be that could have told us because, maybe those glasses were cat eye glasses that were worn in the 50s. Well, that's not true anymore. Everybody has, sort of their, style that they have. And so I have a pair of cat eye glasses that I like to wear. So no, that doesn't tell us whether it's contemporary or non-contemporary, but the dental appliance would more than likely tell us, because there's a lot of times there's serial numbers on those. And so we can track those down or sort of know a certain date when that particular one was used, or we can track it, to the person. So a little bit more on contemporary, non-contemporary. We look at primary indicators that we use to assess whether remains are contemporary or non-contemporary. And they are taphonomic, contextual, and biocultural. And taphonomic indicators affect sort of the appearance, the quality, and the preservation of the remains. Context or contextual indicators refer to where something was found in relation to other artifacts or bits of evidence, when in time it was found, and when it was originally deposited. Now, biocultural factors such as like body modifications, occlusal attrition on the teeth where it's all worn down, cranial deformations, they might be able to show us whether or not some, burial or death or whatever is contemporary or non-contemporary. So here's the definition. Everybody's like, what's forensic taphonomy? This is a good one that I like. It's the study of the postmortem changes to human remains, focusing largely on environmental effects, including decomposition in soil and water, and interactions with plants, insects, and other animals. So it's basically what happens to skeletal remains after death. So here's sort of an example of this was a hip socket that was found with a femur. And so what this would be is sort of taphonomic, contextual, and biocultural. So when it was done in the days it was done. Here's another one. This is a calcified Mayan skull on the cave floor. And the information we would get from here is taphonomic, because it would be the changes that happen, the calcified remains, and then contextual. So where were they found in relation to, these burials? So another one. Now this is taphonomic changes. So this was a picture of sort of scavenging from vultures. And so this is a 24-hour period. So this is what happens to, or can happen to human remains in 24 hours. So that's taphonomic changes right there. This is an interesting one. This is taphonomic and contextual. The contextual part of it, I'll show you on the next slide. This is a set of part of human remains, the part of the top of the skull. And this is from a 13,000-year-old remains from what was referred to as the Anzac site. This is my husband's PhD, his dissertation work. And so these remains were discovered, and like I said, they were over 13,000 years old. Now, they were found with this. So these were considered grave goods that were found with those skeletal elements. And so what we knew is that these weren't, contemporary things. These are what are referred to as Clovis points and Clovis tools. And so this was a toolkit from that time. And so we associate those together. So those were together with them. Now, if you would have found that skull that I had on the previous slide, if you would have found that with keys and a cell phone, that's providing different context, right, than this. So that kind of helps you think of the contemporary versus non-contemporary. So what we were looking at is this is not a crime, but it is interesting for us. So for researchers, it tells us a lot about that society, or the cultural norms, or what they did for hunting and gathering food. Here's another one. And so this one is getting into the biocultural. This is an example of what we refer to as trepanation. And this is from the Neolithic period, but this was done a lot. Couple different reasons why it was done. Sometimes it was done to release pressure. A lot of times, depending on what culture did this or performed this, it was to exorcise evil spirits from the remains. Now, a lot of people lived through this. So sometimes you'll see hailed trepanation. Now, we do trepanation now. We do it in contemporary society. We do that when there's like swelling on the brain. They'll remove sort of a part of the skull and, sort of take it off so the brain can swell and then come back down. So we do a form of this, but it doesn't look quite this, I don't know, drastic. So. Okay, and so here's part of sort of the biocultural. Now, these types of things wouldn't really show up, like the scarification, the beautification. They wouldn't necessarily show up on skeletal remains. You would see the teeth because of the beautification to the teeth. But what it doesn't tell us is it doesn't necessarily tell us whether this is contemporary or non-contemporary remains, but it sort of helps us. And so this is a really cute story. I like to tell this story. And this is Dr. Bill Bass. He was basically the father sort of forensic anthropology. And this is the case of Colonel William Shy. He was killed in 1864. And as this story goes, and it's wonderful if you ever get to hear Dr. Bass tell it, but in late December 1977, Dr. Bass was called in to consult when the disturbed grave of a Confederate officer, Lieutenant Colonel Sly, or Colonel Shy, was discovered. Now, the grave was dug down 3 or 4 feet, but shockingly, the head and part of, I think, the hands were removed, and the body was in a sitting position in this antiquated cast iron coffin, dressed in what appeared to be a tuxedo jacket. So it was interesting, though, this Colonel Sly, he still had some pink tissue on his set of remains. So that isn't, indicative of a really old death. So Dr. Bass had to, sort of take it in and research it or whatever. But it ended up that Dr. Shy, Colonel Shy, was just so well embalmed that he actually had still tissue showing, but it was from the Civil War. So it was kind of a neat case. And Dr. Bass said, well, had to check it out and had to make sure that it wasn't somebody hadn't moved somebody out of a grave and replaced somebody else. So it's sort of a neat one on contemporary versus non-contemporary remains and whether something was a crime or not a crime. Okay, so let's think about some of the other considerations. We like to look at where did the death occur? Do we have a primary scene? So is that, where you found the remains or where you found the body, is that the primary scene? Or did we have a secondary scene? And one of the things that anthropologists are pretty good at is sort of being able to tell the difference whether or not a body was moved. So this is, just sort of an example of a primary scene. A body was off to the side and blood in the sink and blood on the floor. And so this next one was what we refer as a sort of a secondary scene. And so this was a burn pit from, I think many of you may know this, the case of Stephen Avery, and they discovered the remains of Teresa Halbach. And so these remains were moved to like a burn pit, and so they were moved around. So that's something that anthropologists can help with, is to be able to decide if the body was put there or moved there at a separate time, or if parts of the body were moved there and buried in another area. So that's part of the thing that we do. Let me see how I'm doing for time. Okay. So then, how does this all happen? How do we proceed? Well, we have sort of a methodology that we follow, especially when we're at a crime. We want to protect the integrity of the scene. We want to process the death scene. We want to map, sketch, and photograph. We want to do excavation and recovery techniques. And we always want to protect the chain of custody. So here we have protecting the scene. And so what you want to do here is you want to control the ingress and egress. This is kind of fun. This was a class that me and Dr. Hillary Parsons taught in Albany. This was, we were teaching the Albany State Police how to sort of excavate a burial, but we also did a scattered remains course with it. So this is what's referred to as a pedestrian line search. And so you want to do your mapping, sketching, photographing the scene. This is an example of, we teach this using a compass rose, a rose azimuth. And everybody's like, why not just use, the Bosch little measuring devices or whatever? Well, how often do you show up with your Bosch or whatever and your batteries don't work? So you sort of need a backup way to do it. So we teach this. And so then we have excavation and recovery of human remains. And we also recover items of evidentiary value. And so we teach this course. This was a fun course in San Diego that we taught, and it poured rain. They said it never rains in Southern California. Well, it poured rain on us, so that was pretty fun. And then you want to inventory and document recovered items. And like I say, it's always really important to keep that, chain of custody. Okay, so we want to know if the remains are skeletonized. Are they buried, scattered, burned? We have another one like submerged, so you need to determine that. So here's a buried remains. Here's some scattered remains. Here's some burned remains. And then we want to know, are remains articulated or disarticulated? Now, this behind me, this is articulated. So everything is articulating, it's articulating with other bones. So moving. Disarticulated is when it's all spread out and nothing is articulating with the next bone. Okay, so if human remains are not skeletonized, what we need to do is we need to assess the level of decomposition to try to establish the time since death, and that's also known as the postmortem interval. It's really helpful to do this because a lot of times, a lot of the anthropologists study, like I said before, sort of time since death interval, and we do a lot of research at, there used to be the body farm in Tennessee. Now I believe there's 6 or 7 of them where people actually, study not just decomp, but other things at those body farms. But so that's what a lot of investigators want to know. They'll call me up and they'll say, how long has this person been dead? When did they die? How long have they been dead? So that's what we want to help out with. And then we do the processing and inventory of the remains. We do soft tissue removal because we have to get to the full bone and be able to examine the bone. We do the post-processing of the remains, and then of course we return the remains once we're done with our analysis. We want to figure out how many individuals are present, and this is referred to as, we call it MNI, and that means minimum number of individuals. So you can see that this picture is a picture of a mass grave, and you want to determine, how many do I have here? So as an example, if you had 2 skulls, your MNI would be at least 2. So, in this mass grave, how many do we have? I don't know. We have to do all those things beforehand. We have to sort it out. We have to inventory. If we have, 2 left femurs, that's more than likely at least 2 individuals that are present. So we need to know that. We need to inventory the remains once we've recovered the remains and saved this evidence. So we want to know, who is it? We do what's referred to as a biological profile, or we also call it an osteobiography. And with that, we're looking for biological sex. We're looking at age estimation. We're looking at the cultural / geographic affiliation. We're looking for stature and also unique characteristics. We also want to know what happened. These are different types of trauma. There's sharp force, blunt force, projectile, blast trauma, fire-related trauma. So these are things that we're looking for when we're examining or analyzing the skeletal remains. Sharp force trauma, blunt force trauma, projectile trauma, blast trauma. That was from the Boston Marathon bombing. Fire-related trauma. So if trauma is present, when did it occur? So these are, we refer to them as antemortem. So antemortem means before death. Perimortem means at or around the time of death. So in that sort of window of death, right around there. And then postmortem is any type of trauma that happened after death. And lastly, people ask us, why did death occur? I don't know. If you can answer that, that's the $1 million question. So we don't know. We don't know why the death occurred. So what we do after we're all done is we prepare case reports. And our case reports are, very, here's what we're looking at. Here's the defects that we've seen, or no defects, or here's the inventory sheet and biological profile. So we list all this and we submit it usually to attorneys or pathologists, whomever has requested our services. And so we submit this case report, and then a lot of times you'll be asked to testify about what's in your case report at a trial. And so you would often do expert testimony. I had to put the picture of my friend Neil Haskell in here. He was testifying at Casey Anthony's trial. So that's my presentation, and I would love to answer any questions that you guys have.
So yes, Dr. White, I'm gonna have actually Alex Suarez come on first.
Okay.
To ask a question he might have.
Sure.
And give folks a chance to copy down your information.
Sure.
Your website, boneandstonetanthrosciences.com, and also boneandstone@yahoo.com to email you if they have any questions. And if you don't mind, you can stop sharing your screen, and then both of us can come on in gallery form.
Absolutely.
Awesome. And so I'm going to ask Alex to come on. I know that Shannon is also, you didn't get a chance to meet Shannon before the show, but these folks are our criminal justice majors. And well, I know Alex is a criminal justice minor, but I always make him a major anyway. So, you know, the law and criminal justice are so related that's why I think that, Alex. But Alex, go ahead. I know you have a question burning on your heart for Dr. White. What an amazing presentation. So fascinating. Go ahead, Alex. Any questions that you might have for her?
I do actually. And I agree. I thought the presentation was great. I thought of a couple questions, but I'll start with this one. What do you think is the biggest deterrence or like a struggle that you face when trying to determine the cause of death? And also like the same question, but what is like a big difficulty you face when you're trying to determine the difference between whether or not remains actually belong to an animal or to a human?
Okay. Well, as far as there's, I think you guys probably know there's both cause of death and then manner of death. And so manner of death is, suicide, homicide, things like that. Cause of death is, certainly harder to determine, what the cause of death is. What we do in our position is we're not the ones that actually determine that. We take all of our analysis and submit it to, coroners or medical examiners, and they usually are the ones that finally determine the actual cause of death. I've had cases where I examined the entire, skeletal remains, and there was nothing. There was no signs of any type of trauma, no sharp force trauma, no any kind of trauma, but of course the person was dead. So what I do is I hand that information over, and then they have to decide what to do with it. So I'm basically just sort of, you guys are too young for this, but it used to be Dragnet, and there was a guy in there called Jack Webb, and he'd say, just the facts, just the facts. So that's all we provide, is we provide the data for medical examiners or coroners to go over, and they're the ones that determine the cause of death. So we just sort of help it along. And then your other one was about the human or non-human?
Well, actually, can I ask a different question building off of what you just said, your response?
Sure.
You're saying
Sure.
your like focus point is building up the facts. So in the fields of like anthropology and like archaeology, what can investigators do to improve their rate of accuracy when it comes to like finding these facts out?
For the anthropologists or for the investigators?
For the investigators, I mean.
Well, I think a key that we've been, as forensic anthropologists, that we have been sort of trying to say over and over and over to different agencies and to different, law enforcement, things like that, is have the professionals use your multidisciplines that we have out there. Use your professionals to gather the evidence that they need to do. Gather it in a way that it's going to be best for you. I think what ends up happening is we get really frustrated because a lot of law enforcement will go to a scene and they will recover the remains. And then they'll take them into their office or whatever, and then they'll call us. And it's like, no, don't do that. I mean, the best thing to do is to call the professional, whatever professional it is, whether it's a forensic anthropologist, whether it's an entomologist, whether it's a botanist, whoever, call the right people for the scene, and take your multidisciplinary approach to the crime, or to this, if it is a crime or whatever, but take that multidisciplinary approach to come to the answer. It's really frustrating and hard for us if they've sort of, the only way I can say it is if they've botched a scene and they bring these remains to us and they say, here, here, tell us what happened here. Well, during the recovery of the remains, maybe they've broken them, maybe they left a good deal of the remains behind. As you saw on that one slide where the sticks and the stones, they all look the same. And to an untrained set of eyes, how do they know that they're recovering all of the right skeletal elements? And there's, for example, there's a, really tiny bone that's referred to as the hyoid bone. It's, way up in your neck up here. And it's a very important bone that needs to be recovered for a lot of strangulation cases, things like that. And so if somebody goes out to the scene and collects it and they don't do it correctly, and they bring, those skeletal remains back to us, and maybe they've missed the hyoid bone, then we've just missed a bunch of useful information. So that's probably really frustrating for us. And so I think they could do a better job. I guess it comes back down to your question. I think they could do a better job by thinking about a multidisciplinary approach to solving that scene and getting the right professionals at the time. Like, I don't do law enforcement. I don't show up and try to do law enforcement. So, don't try to recover the remains, especially in a really compromised scene where they're, disarticulated or burned or butchered, things like that. So that's probably the best advice that I could give.
Great. Thank you. Good
Sure.
question. Great answer.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask Shannon to come on. And Shannon is our also criminal justice major, and she is a dual enrollment, which means she's launching from her criminal justice bachelor's degree, which she will receive. I always forget, Shannon, how much more time I have with you. Do I have like, are
Okay,
you
there we go.
graduating now?
No, I'm a junior, so I have
Excellent.
another year.
Yes.
More
Thank God.
time.
Okay, that's great. Good. I still have you for another year. But anyway, then once she graduates, Dr. White, she goes right into law school. So
Fantastic.
so we have some real bright people, and you did get a chance to meet Joey beforehand. And we also have Michaela Porter, who is not a criminal justice major. She's a biology major. So maybe much more in line with your discipline. And we'll get her on later. But Shannon, you have a question, right?
Yes. First of all, I found this presentation really interesting, as this isn't a topic I've learned about in any of my classes yet, so I really enjoyed it.
Great.
But one of the questions I had is, during your presentation, you said one of the first things you do is determine whether the body's under 50 years old, over 50, over 500. If it does happen to be over the 50 or 500 plus years, what do you do with the bodies?
Well, we still, it's sort of up to this person on the scene. A lot of times when I show up and come to a scene and we've determined that it's let's just say I'm in Montana. So we have a lot of Native American burials. And so if I show up to a scene and they say, here's where it's found, and, was in association with, we found these arrowheads or whatever, then I suggest leaving them, because they were buried for a reason, and probably with a ceremony. And so they were meant to be left there. So it's always sort of, you take it case by case on what you do with those remains. If a lot of times, if it's a situation where they're going to be sort of washed away or lost to weather, let's just say, fluvial transport. So if there's a flood or something and there's, a set of remains that are sort of on the bank, and that you're going to lose, part of those remains, then yeah, you want to recover them, and then you figure it out after that. If there was an old cemetery there or whatever, you want to recover them because you don't want them going downstream and disarticulating and things like that. So you kind of just, handle it on a case by case basis, and you sort of determine once you're at the scene. And you guys know, because you're in, this field of study, is that you use your gut. It's one of the best tools that we have, is to use our gut. And I had shown that before with a sort of clandestine burial thing. I was called by a coroner to look at a grave, and to me, when I showed up, it didn't make sense to me. It's, all of the signs were off. It was definitely a grave, but it didn't feel to me like somebody was purposefully hiding this grave. It looked to me like they were sort of drawing attention to this grave. And I said, I have a sense that this is maybe a dog or a family pet or something, because it was, it wasn't marked with a gravestone or anything, but it was, there were rocks on it, light colored rocks. And it just felt to me like that wasn't going to be, somebody that was hiding human remains. So use your gut. Let your gut sort of tell you when you go to a scene. Take a really good, before you do anything, just take a really good look around, and sort of feel the scene, and sort of, I don't know, this is weird to say, but let it sort of talk to you.
Great. Thank you so much. Shannon, did you have anything else?
That was pretty much it. I was just wondering if there were the situations where you ever leave the remains, but you answered that. So thank you.
You bet.
Great. Thank you so much, Shannon, for being here with us. And what we're going to do now is we're going to go to the webinar participants. We have 2 questions in the chat. And I also want to invite our webinar participants, if they want to ask a question, that they can certainly raise their hand. And once they do that, I will give them privileges, mic privileges, and they can go ahead and ask you the question, themselves. But here's 2 that were in the chat. Has there ever been a time when you could not identify if the bones were human?
Not yet. Not
Okay.
yet.
Okay.
So I know
yet.
it'll happen, but not yet.
All right, that's cool. Christine Dupree asks, the remains that were found that were 1,300 years old, how was it determined that they were that old? I guess she's asking, what's the technical process? And was it just by the tools that were there with the remains? So that cultural context, I guess, piece.
Well, it was 13,000 year old remains, but they do what's called radiocarbon dating. And so they were radiocarbon dated to that date. So, and also, it sort of helps to have that supporting evidence of that particular group of grave goods, which were Clovis remains, which were, sort of in a time frame, same sort of time frame. So yeah, we go to the science, then we go to the radiocarbon dating and things like that. So.
Okay, great. I hope that answered their question. And if you do have any questions, you can certainly raise your hand, and my production team behind the scenes will let me know if I miss anybody. But I'm going to ask Joey to come on, and Joey is going to field some of the questions that are in the YouTube chat. So Joey, you met Dr. White earlier, and take it away, yeah. Joey. Go ahead, ask away.
Well, thank you for the presentation, firstly. And then our first question comes from Hannah Chaval. She asks, what's the difference between forensic anthropology and a forensic sciences?
Forensic anthropology is more of a specialty in the forensic sciences. So in, the world of forensic science, there's all kinds of us, and there's toxicologists and there's biologists. And so we are is sort of a subfield within the field. of forensic science. So you can study forensic science, and then you can go into a specialized field, whatever, sort of floats your boat. And which is, sort of, I liked that part of it. And it's like forensic entomology, toxicology. So you sort of study broadly forensic science, and then, you sort of break into one of those disciplines. So.
Gotcha. Next question from Jenny Reynolds. She's also asking about the 1,300-year-old remains that your husband worked on.
I guess it's 13,000, right, Dr. White?
13,000.
Yeah.
Hard to get your head around.
Yeah, I'm like, wow, that's a really long time. But she asks, you kind of already answered this with the case reports and what's looking at them inside of them, but she asks, what do you do essentially with the deceased belongings? Do they stay with you? Have you ever buried them again? What happens to the findings after?
Thank you for letting me answer this because it's really interesting. On contemporary cases, and if it's crime scene or whatever, all of the evidence goes straight to coroners, medical legal investigators, whoever's investigating it. So we don't keep the clothes, we don't keep things like that. That goes straight to them, that chain of custody, so it goes straight to them. Now, that particular, the 13,000-year-old remains and those grave goods, we were able to rebury those human remains in a really neat ceremony with 7 different tribes. And so they were reburied on the land in which they were discovered on. So we were able to be a part of that process where there was some really good sort of mutual healing from these different tribes. And so that was really cool. So we were able to rebury. Once we're done with our skeletal analysis, then we hand that over to, usually funeral homes, whatever, and then they contact the family, and then the family does whatever disposition they choose, whether it's, cremation or burial. So, but yeah, we like to get them back,
Gotcha.
to the families. So.
I have a
I'm sorry, Joey. No, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Finish up the questions on YouTube, and then I'll go. I have some follow-up for Dr. White. Go ahead.
Gotcha. Yeah. Just a quick question based on that. Obviously, you've never kept human remains, but have you ever seen something animal-wise that, like, wow, I want to keep this,
Well, yeah, it's interesting. The human remains, we have teaching samples that we use, that we teach with. So we do have that, and I do have animal remains as well. So, and my husband,
Gotcha.
who he deals with artifacts, not human remains. So he's always like, oh, what are you bringing home? So I tend to cart home all kinds of things. I'm usually out, sort of processing it or whatever. And he's like, you're not bringing that in the house yet. So I like to process those. And then I take them to these classes that I present. And so when I teach, human or non-human, I take examples. I have one sitting on my desk. I put the other ones away, but yeah.
Yeah, that's very cool.
Yeah, I'm a weirdo.
Jarlin Ramirez. No, you're not. I like that. Jarlin Ramirez asked, in order to do forensic studies like you showed in the presentation, do you think it's best to get a degree specifically in anthropology? And then she goes on to say that she's a biology major interested in research and within forensic sciences. What do you think is the best to do?
I think what you do is you something will speak to you. She's in biology, something will speak to you. The human body and what happens to the human body spoke to me. So that's why I sort of angled into, forensic anthropology. But the biological part of it, you're going to find your niche. And something is going to be more interesting to you than something else. And so you're going to find your way to it. Or like I study, like I liked the entomology part. I liked the I do a lot of study with crime scene, people. So I've done bloodstain pattern courses, things like that. So I take everything I can get. So all of it interests me. Everything that happens to the body or happens at a scene interests me. So I still, even though I'm a forensic anthropologist, I study all of it. So you just specialize in something.
Great.
No, yeah.
So Joey,
So
I
she's
think
in the right page.
I'm sorry. I'd like you to combine those last two questions on YouTube, the challenging and interesting case questions, and then I'm going to go to the chat because there's more questions in the webinar.
Yes. So Maya and James, they have a similar question. They're basically asking, what was the most interesting / challenging case you ever worked on?
Well, there's several that I think probably the hardest part for me isn't so much the bodies or what happens to bodies at death or what crazy people do to other people, and so it's not so much how, what I recovered from the bodies or what I'm seeing. To me, it's the human element. Like, how can people do that to other people? So that's the part that you need a little psychology to go with your forensic sciences to know, why people do this. So I have a lot of I have cases that are sort of a simple case when we're looking at the skeletal remains portion of it, but the case is really odd, or the way that they were killed was very odd. And so I think it's the combination of what happens at the death, that, who's involved, things like that. So it's sort of, I look at it as a whole. So, and I always follow up, and the death investigators always keep me in the loop. And so we've got quite a few that are not solved. So those are the ones that sort of stick with me, that, I've provided everything I can. And I gave the, material back to them. And so they don't have enough. And so those are the ones that are probably the most upsetting or the hardest for me, is that I think I know, as far as the information that I gave them, but nothing's happened to those cases. So
you just actually answered one of the questions. So I'm going to leave that question alone, which is actually about like the unsolvable cases affecting you. And so you've kind of answered that. I'm going to combine these two questions. If the death is caused by something other than like blunt force trauma, bone injury, for example, wrist cutting, carbon monoxide poisoning, being burned beyond recognition kind of thing. So the question is, how then do you make that determination if it's other than blunt force trauma or bone injury?
Really great question. All of these are great questions. And just because you don't have, like, lack of that evidence is actually evidence. So what, we're always happy if we can, look at the skeletal remains and rule out any trauma to the remains, because that narrows down sharp force, blunt force, things like that. So it's a little frustrating for the death investigators, but we always, we feel like it's sort of success because we're still giving them evidence. We're saying, here you have a set of human remains and there's not a thing wrong. Maybe you have old injuries that are healed, or an old break that's healed. That helps you sort of identify somebody, or, kind of figure out who a person is. But, like you say, if it's carbon monoxide or whatever, we're not going to see that on the skeleton. But that's still data. It's still data, and it still helps your investigator. And, sometimes they're hoping for something, they're hoping to see a broken hyoid, or they're hoping to see something. And they all get a little frustrated when they don't have that type of evidence, but we can only give them what we analyze or what we see in the data. So.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So now it's my turn, because I'm really excited about the DMORT piece.
Sure.
When I was a first responder at Ground Zero and then placed in charge of the mental health response at the Family Center, we worked for about a year and a half, taking families down to the site. There was, in the early days, in the early weeks and months, there was a lot of denial and shock and disbelief and hope that their person, their loved one would be somehow found, buried, and be able to be recovered. Rescued, really. And then I think that as the days and the weeks went on, then they started to realize that that wasn't the case. Finding remains, as you know, post 9/11 was, there was like half of those who had perished there were remains, and the remains that were found were hardly intact. So we worked a lot with DMORT and doing death notifications. Can you speak to that and your work? I also worked with the Katrina post Hurricane Katrina and worked for it was like a disaster response team that we went down and again worked with DMORT specifically on that. Can you talk a little bit about that work, if you don't mind?
Sure. And it was interesting too. I know it frustrated some of my committee members on, sort of my research, because I remember when I'd given them the topic of death notification interactions, they were like, why is this important? It's just their job. They show up and tell people that somebody's, died. And I'm like, oh no, it's much more than that. It's, much more important that we become more empathetic in our work. And that, when we show up and we have to work with, often, like you said, we're working with family members, and we have to learn how to be sensitive and how to talk to them the right way. And with my research, the death notification interactions, most of the death notification research that had been done before I did it didn't involve the receiver. So I did an ethnographic bit of research where I spoke to those that had received death notifications and those that had given death notifications, and had long interviews and sort of asked what it meant to them and how they could have done it better, and what could we have done different, and what could they recommend. And it was so interesting because I felt like when I came out of it, I was going to be able to say that the people that were receiving death notifications were way more impacted, than those that were giving the death notifications. But I didn't find that to be true. I found that the people that give death notifications often do it, daily. I had a young gal, she was in her 20s, that had given already 1,500 death notifications in her young career. And it was really interesting during our interview, I'd said, well, how does this impact you or whatever? And she said, well, it doesn't, it's just part of my job. And as she's talking to me, tears are running down her face. And I said, it doesn't bother you? And she said, well, yeah, I guess it does bother me. And I talked to a lot of, people that deliver those notifications that their co-workers or whatever had committed suicide because they didn't get help for that type of work. And so a lot of the people that notified would go from a death scene, like a real awful, grotesque scene with, the smell of death in their nose and death on their clothes or whatever. And they would go right from that scene to notifying a family member. And both of them are emotionally charged events. And, they were just vibrating with anticipation, knowing they had to notify the family, and they had to, switch off their detective or their death investigator hat, and they had to put on their empathetic, compassionate hat and, go speak to the family members. And so very impactful. And, as an anthropologist, people that study human behavior, I just thought it was really important to sort of marry all those things together, because I've, been in this business. When I first started, I was an intern for a coroner office. And that's what got me thinking about it the first time. I went with a coroner that had been doing the work for 27 years. And we went and did a death notification. As soon as we walked out, he said, I screwed that one up. And I said, oh, I don't think you did. And he said, no, I did. I screwed it up. And And it was really interesting because that wasn't my perception, but it was his perception,
Yeah.
you know? And so it was just, it's fascinating work. And thank you for asking me about that. You know, we see that a lot. Like I said, I've done 4 different deployments with COVID deaths, and, you know, it's just amazing. People are amazing. You know, you know, a lot of times we go to these homes to recover bodies, and the people are compassionate towards us. They're like, I'm so sorry, or they'll apologize for their house. You know, oh, it's a mess. I'm so sorry,
Right.
or they'll, you know, pat us and try to comfort us
Yes.
on their darkest times. And so it's a beautiful thing, and it's a wonderful thing. And I love the human element of this.
Yeah.
And so I like to
Well-
walk between the human and the, you know, science.
I love that. And I love that about you is how you're taking something that's so scientific and so unique, and yet there's this human side which, you know, takes into consideration that these are more than bones. These are people that have families, and
Yeah.
some of them are missing. Some of them have, you know, fallen victim to homicide, or worse, like terrorist attack, for example. And that's not to minimize COVID death at all, because that has a whole host of other, you know, unique qualities to it, where folks weren't allowed to be with their family members at the time of their death, kind of thing, you know. So that there's all of this, and you've really brought out so much, so multidimensional. I know one of the things about my work with DMORT and the 9/11 work was the inability to make an identification, and despite the fact that, you know, and that was a great example of blunt force trauma to the nth degree, as well as burns and another, and, you know, fire related and all of that. So being able to identify remains, or the inability to, really caused so much crisis and trauma within the families. And even if they had a wallet on them with identification, and some dental records were not even, you know, giving you the ability, the coroner anyway, to make the identification. It was so difficult and so painful and so hard to explain to the families the bureaucracy of all of this. But there is a science to it, right?
Yeah.
So the ability to identify remains and then go ahead and make that notification, you know, that the even though the father went to get the dental records and we bring them back to the ME, we're still not able to identify this body, but yet it's his son.
And
we
you
can't
think
release it.
about, we talk about what a transient society we are. So it used to be that people grew up, you know, in their hometown, they stayed in their hometown, they maybe worked in the future in their hometown. Well, now people move around so much that, you know, you don't necessarily live in the same town you grew up in, and maybe you have moved 10 times. And the interesting part is that I don't even know if my mom knows where I go to the dentist. So when, you know, when something happens to somebody and they say, well, you know, they had their dental records. Well, I don't think my mom would be able to tell you who my dentist was. And, you know, maybe we have a lot of things done to our teeth. So maybe if she went to an old dentist that I went to 20 years ago, my teeth look a lot different from then to what they look like now. So, you know, you're trying to match, you know, dentition that no longer matches. So you say, well, no, that's not the person, because, you know, this person had all this other dental work done. Well, in, you know, however many years that passed, you could have a lot of dental work done. So, you know,
Right.
and people get really frustrated because they say, well, they have all the information they need. Why don't they just say it? And it's like, it's not easy. It's
Right,
not that easy.
right. And
So-
finding a wallet isn't enough. Right.
I have one of my first cases as my internship in, you know, like 2005, a man was hit and the poor lady hit him on her way to work. And so, you know, here's this gentleman in this town, and we look at his wallet. Well, he has 5 different types of identification, and there's 5 different aliases. Well, we didn't ever find who this man was. And so, and I've always sort of checked, but his family is never known. We knew that he died, but we don't even know who he is. So we looked at every derivation of the name that was given and the aliases, and, you know, we didn't ever notify, because we didn't know who he was. So I think about him, you know, and he was one of my first ones, and it should have been so easy. He was right there. You know, we went to some homeless camps and things like that. And, you know, people are like, yeah, I remember him, but I don't know his family. And he didn't ever talk about anybody. So we just, those, you know, it's just not easy. It's not cut and dried.
Yeah.
So, and that's the part that I do like about it too, is the human element.
Here's a final question, and I know that Hannah Great Batch has a question for me, which I'll answer gladly in a minute, because it's about shamelessly plugging things, and I love to do that. But Claire asks, have you ever been hired by a family, or a family member, because they weren't satisfied with the investigator's findings?
Yes. Yeah, I have. And sometimes that's frustrating for them too, because I may not tell them. I'm not going to tell them what they want me to tell them. I'm going to tell them, you know, I'm objective, and that's what I do. And so sometimes, you know, they're hoping if I hire them, I'm going to tell them what they want to hear. And unfortunately, I don't do that. I tell them what the evidence tells me, and so that's sad and hard, and they're mad,
Yes.
you know,
Yes.
and frustrated, you know, but
Yes. And
I can
that's
only give
all
them.
that's all part of the grieving process. And so, you know, we talk about Kubler-Ross's, you know, the stages of death, and coming to that acceptance place, or we never like to use the word closure, because really there isn't any, but I really loved how you said earlier, healing and transformation can happen. That there's hope for that. But like any of the deaths that we've had in our lives, we know that we're forever changed by them. The closer we are to folks who die, the more it's impactful to us, and the more it changes us. And, you know, I find for myself that the longer I live, the more I'm alive on this planet, the more loss I experience. It doesn't seem to get any better, because there's sort of a cumulative grieving process that happens then. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. You know, and I guess, you know, you can compartmentalize, but yeah, you're just piling it on at that stage. So yeah. And so we look at that and look for that, and make sure everybody around us is okay.
Yes.
And you got to have sort of a buddy system.
And that we take care of ourselves too, because the work that you do, it's so real, and it's so powerful and potent and important, but you have to take yourself too. And that's why sometimes in medical death, legal investigations and death investigations, death notifications, law enforcement, first responders, DMORT folks, you start to become callous, and you have to be careful of that, because it will come out some other way. It comes out. It may not come out right then and there on the scene, but it's going to come out at some point. And to take care of yourself, I think, is really important.
Yeah. I refer to it as dark humor, and, you know, things like that. I mean, it's just, some of these scenes are so outrageous that you catch yourself giggling, or you just do something that, you know, you get to giggling, or you're working with people and it's absolutely so stressful, and the heightened level of anxiety or whatever, and somebody does something goofy or whatever, then you get the giggles and you can't stop, and you think, this is the most horrific scene, you know, and this is the worst thing you can imagine, and, you know, yet somehow you're giggling, but it's just sort of, I guess it's a coping skill that we use. But like on, you know, different things like DMORT, things like that, we all do sort of little short debriefs, you know, a real intense moment or whatever. I always sort of make sure, I worked with a lot of military folks, that this isn't their job to do it. And so after each sort of thing, I would say, how are you doing? Are you okay? Is everybody okay? How is
Yes.
that? How are you? And it's sort of hands-on. You're like, are you okay? I'm okay. Are you okay? I'm okay.
Yes,
And so
exactly. And I like that you said, you also bring up the point of like, sometimes we're not even prepared or trained for this, and yet we're forced into that situation. That's exactly what happened with the 150 cops that worked for me at Ground Zero. They weren't ready. They weren't mental health practitioners. They weren't crisis intervention specialists. And yet they had to rise to the occasion and start giving death notifications to, hundreds of people. And so, but we do the best we can. And then we're either changed by it forever, or we incorporate it somehow into our sense of being.
It writes on the slate of your life for sure. It's
Yes.
part of your biography.
Yes. Well, this was a fascinating discussion tonight. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you and your time, and just your care and concern. How wonderful the presentation was, and I really hope that in the future we can get together. I don't want to make any kind of announcement yet about things that we're collaborating on, because it hasn't been finalized yet. But we do have something very special coming up next year in the spring that we have to finalize. And I don't even want to tell you what the topic is, but if Dr. White's involved, it's going to be really fascinating.
It's a teaser.
It's a teaser. I'm teasing you. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't want to even tell you the name of it yet.
Oh yeah.
But we'll talk offline about it, and we'll finalize it. But thank you again, Dr. White. I'm going to do some shameless plugging now for the Criminal Justice Forum series, and also some shameless plugs around our courses and some of the courses that we offer in our programs. But before I let you go, I was going to ask you to shamelessly plug yourself and your company, your work, books perhaps that you've written that we would love to hear about.
Yeah, you can look on the website boneandstoneanthrosciences.com, and just kind of check it out. And I want to thank you guys for asking me. I'm always flattered when somebody wants to visit with me. So it's like I love my job. I love people. I love everything about this. So I just always love when I can talk about it. So thank you very much. And
thank you again.
Don't hesitate if any of you has a question, or if we were not able to answer a question, shoot me an email. Perfect. And I check it pretty often, and I'll try to answer your question unless you stump me. Even if you stump me, I'll just tell you stumped me. But feel free to. I'm very approachable. So feel free to.
Thank you so much, and thank you for your time. You're so gracious with your time, and we really appreciate it here at Fischler College of Education School of Criminal Justice at Nova Southeastern University. And I'll talk to you soon about that other thing that we want to do together.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
You
so
bet.
here's the shameless plug part. We have so many courses and so many programs here at the School of Criminal Justice in the Fischler College of Education at Nova Southeastern University. So we've placed a lot of those course offerings and those descriptions in the chat. We have an unbelievable undergrad program. We have amazing faculty that work pretty much one-on-one with our students. We have developed an amazing relationship with our undergrad students in criminal justice. And we even branch out, as you can see, with biology, and Joey is, he's a major in accounting, and God knows we need forensic accountants anyway. So we have an amazing PhD program in criminal justice as well, and a master's in criminal justice. So if you're interested, you could reach out to me directly. I know that someone had asked the very great, amazing question about, hey, what other things do we have going on here and in our criminal justice forum? And I'm going to ask Joey to come on and give us a little commercial of what's to come, what's left in this season, and then what are we going to be doing next season. Go ahead, Joey,
Yes,
tell us.
so great. So for the rest of 2022, we do have 4 more podcasts. The first one is going to be next Thursday, Same time. It's with the Davie Police here at NSU, and it's about best practices in policing. Then the next Thursday at November 17th, 7 p.m., we are bringing back Ed Denzel, and we missed him last month because he was, busy at a court case testifying actually on one of his previous podcasts. But he's coming back for us. And then right after that, on December 1st, 7 p.m., also Thursday night, we're bringing Chief Carol Presson, who will discuss good police leadership. And then for December 8th, which is our last show of 2022, we're bringing Ed Denzel again. And then some things to look out for in 2023, we do have Maggots, Murder, and More, March 9th at 7 p.m. and with Dr. Adrienne Brundrage. She's a forensic entomologist, and she's from the University of Texas.
Great. Thank you so much, Joey. And, we have some other things that are coming up that are in the works. I just can't, I'm not at liberty yet because it hasn't been confirmed. So we'll let you know. Some of them are in the forensic field. Very interesting topics, but we're trying to line up a medical examiner along with Dr. Plotkin and Dr. White, and we'll have like a big, really nice, a trio to discuss something that's really, really a fascinating topic in forensics. But the basic way for you to find out what it is that we're doing is to go to Nova Southeastern University, Fischler College of Education, School of Criminal Justice, and look on our events page, because that's where we have posted a lot of things. I'm in constant collaboration with Alpha Phi Sigma. They're excellent. The headquarters there, they're just absolutely wonderful to work with because they send out the announcements, and that's how we get our audience from Alpha Phi Sigma. So I want to thank our dean, Dr. Kimberly Durham, Dr. Tammy Kushner, Dr. Marcelo Castro. This is our the three most amazing administrators that we have in the School of Criminal Justice and in the College of Education. They support everything we do. I want to thank them. I want to thank my team. Michaela, Michaela is actually just doing the YouTube. Is that right, Joey? I can't bring her on. Yeah, I can't.
She actually unfortunately had an emergency tonight. She
okay.
Join
okay,
us.
Great. So then I'm gonna thank her in any event, of course. But I won't bring her on to say hello or to say goodnight. Yeah. So thank you, everybody, for joining us for this webinar. We really appreciate your time, and we hope you got something out of it. And we'll see you again very soon.